out in the dry wind and red dust of the frontier, a broke rancher named Luke Merritt lost the only soul that ever stayed by him, his horse, Ashen. But the desperate search across the desert would uncover more than tracks or blood. It would dig up a secret buried deep in the land and in Luke's heart that could either redeem him or destroy everything he thought he knew. By the third day without sleep, Luke Merritt could barely tell 1 mile of Wyoming dust from the next. The wind had sanded the world down to color and sound: bone-white sky, red grit, the rasp of grass against fence wire. He followed a thin scatter of hoof prints along a dry creek until the prints turned to a ragged drag. Ashen had stumbled here. The sight burned through Luke like a brand. He slid from the saddle and tied his other horse to a cottonwood that still held a few tired leaves. The creek was no creek at all, just a ribbon of shallow pools left by spring that hadn't kept its promises. On the far bend, where the bank caved and the mud kept what it could, a black shape lay pitched wrong against the pale. For a heartbeat, his mind refused it. Then everything in him ran forward before his boots did. "Ashen!" he called, and his voice came out thin, like a string pulled too tight. The horse lay on his side in the clay, flank working hard, breath torn and shallow. A dark wetness soaked the fetlock and ran down to crust the color of rust. Flies worried the edges. When Luke knelt, Ashen's ear twitched toward him, a small, stubborn answer that unraveled him more than a scream would have. "I've got you, boy. I've got you." He said it as if the words were a rope. The cut wasn't the kind a fall makes. It tracked long and mean across the inside of the leg, as if a hand that never learned mercy had drawn it with purpose. Luke pressed his palm above the bleeding and felt heat. The fever heat that means the body's already fighting and already losing. He tore a strip from his overshirt, wrapped it tight, and tied it with his teeth, whispering words he hadn't used since he was a boy. The sky throbbed. A hawk cut a bright shape against the glare and cried once, a sound that should have been free but only sounded lonely. Luke's canteen held a last mouthful he'd been saving. He lifted Ashen's head, tilted the tin, and let the slow silver drip work past the black lips. Ashen swallowed, once, twice. The smallness of that victory made Luke's eyes sting. "God, don't take him too," he said. But only the cut bank answered, and it answered with silence. For a while, the only measure was breath. Luke counted without meaning to. 4 quick ones, a pause, 2 longer, a shiver through the shoulder, the hoof scraping at the mud as if the ground had turned against him. He'd seen cattle tear on wire and mend. He'd seen men take worse in winter and come through. He'd never seen Ashen broken, not since the colt came off the reservation string and met him eye to eye, both of them too proud to quit. Every mile of Luke's last years had been tied to this animal like 2 ends of the same rope. He worked because that's what a poor rancher does when prayer won't answer. He strained creek water through his bandana and cleaned what he could, packed the gash with cloth, then rigged a shade from a blanket and 2 fence slats washed down by spring flood. He kept one hand on Ashen's neck so the gelding could feel him there, steady as a post, the way a man steadies a spooked colt by letting it lean its fear against him. Memory tried to drag him backward. His father's laugh over a crooked gate, the bank notice, the night the north barn went to fire and the neighbors said lightning, but Luke knew better. He shoved all that down because it wasn't useful, and because the ache of it would take the strength he needed now. Time went thin. Clouds built and failed. The wind shifted and brought the smell of alkali and sage. Ashen's breaths shortened. The bandage darkened through. Luke rewrapped the leg, tighter this time, talking low because talking filled the emptiness and maybe tied Ashen to the earth a little longer. "Remember the ridge above Red Hollow?" he said, half a laugh, half a pant. "First time I put a saddle on you, you came up under me like I was a burr you meant to scrape off. Dragged me clear across county and had me picking cactus out of places a man shouldn't. Meanest, smartest, best horse I ever saw. Don't you turn stubborn the wrong way on me now." The gelding's ear flicked again. His eye, clouded with pain, found Luke and held. There was a knowing in it Luke had never been able to explain to anybody who didn't already believe in such things. Heat pressed down. The blanket shade trembled as a breeze tried and failed to make itself a mercy. Luke's other horse stamped in the thin cottonwood shadow, but held the tie, trained better than most, because Luke had trained him when training something, anything, was the one thing a broke man could still control. Luke checked the cut again. The edges puffed angry and slick. Swelling crept toward the knee. He'd seen a leg go bad on a ranch hand once, and could still hear the way the doctor said the word he wouldn't say now. He swallowed hard, and the swallow scraped. "I should have found you sooner," he said, shame rising hot as noon. "I should have never let you wander. That fence should have been mended last week, not today." The rest stayed in his throat because there's only so much a man can tell on himself when he's this tired, and the truth cuts worse than wire. Ashen shuddered. A tremor ran the length of him, and his hind hoof struck the mud with a thud like a hammer on green wood. Luke leaned in, both arms around the thick neck, his face in the smell that was sweat and dust and the faint metal of blood. He didn't pray right. He never had. He only said what needed saying. "Stay with me," he whispered. "Stay. I got nothing else left that knows my name." The light tilted toward late without softening. Shadows lengthened but brought no comfort, only a longer reach for dark. Flies thickened. Luke fought them with his hat until his shoulder ached. The wind tired of lying and went still. The cottonwood leaves made a sound like quiet rain, and then gave that up too. He felt the change before he saw it. The way a room changes the instant before a door opens. The horse under his hands went from fighting to listening, that small animal stillness that means a choice is being made. Luke held his breath like a fool, and then let it out because holding it wouldn't buy him anything. Then another sound came. Hoofbeats, deliberate and unhurried, iron on packed sand. Luke straightened, heart banging to a different rhythm. For a second, his hand went to the holster out of habit. Men didn't often come this way unless they had business, and men with business at a dry creek seldom brought good news. Across the shallow bend, where willow scrub threw skinny shadows, a rider eased into view. The horse was white enough to throw back the heat, pale mane stringing in the breeze. The rider wore his hat tipped low and took in the scene without hurry. The makeshift shade, the trampled mud, the black horse with the bandaged leg, and the man with dust ground into every line of his face. Luke didn't speak first. The day had taught him not to spend words he might need later. He set his palms flat on Ashen's neck so the gelding would feel the steady of them and said with his body what he'd been saying all along, "Stay." The white horse stopped at the edge of the pool, as if it knew better than to crowd grief. The rider swung down in one smooth motion. Up close he was older than Luke had thought. Not old, exactly, but carrying miles in his shoulders. His coat was plain. His boots had done real work. He loosened a small satchel from his saddle horn and knelt without asking permission, like a man who asks later, because there's no time to be polite. "I'm not here to take anything," he said, voice low, country flat. "I'm here to see if something can be given back." Luke's mouth opened, then shut. He looked at the stranger's hands, steady, brown, a thin white scar along the thumb, where a blade had slid once and learned not to again. He looked at the satchel and at Ashen and at the dry land around them that had never given anybody more than they fought for. "What are you?" Luke asked, and it came out more plea than challenge. The man lifted his eyes just enough for Luke to catch the color of them, gray like creek stones. When he answered, the words were simple and carried no pride. "Name's Silas Ward," he said. "I mend what I can." His glance cut to the wrapped leg, and something in his jaw hardened. But that wasn't made by falling. The wind found its voice again, a tired voice that had crossed a lot of open country. Luke set his hand back on Ashen because there was one thing he knew for certain, and he said it out loud so the stranger and the horse and the land could hear. "We're not done," he said. "Not yet." Silas Ward studied the words as if they were a wound to be measured. The man moved closer, his boots sinking into the soft mud beside the dying creek. When he knelt, his shadow stretched across Ashen's body like a second blanket. He didn't rush. His kind never did. "Not done," he repeated. "That's a good start." Luke watched him unroll a bundle of faded cloth. Inside lay the tools of a trail doctor, some meant for men, others for beasts. A worn scalpel, a length of twine, a small bottle darkened by sun, and a square of leather for biting. "I can stop the swelling if it hasn't gone too deep," Silas said, his tone level, almost kind. "But I'll need fire and I'll need your trust." Luke stiffened. "I don't trust easy." "Good," Silas murmured. "Easy trust gets things killed." He pressed 2 fingers to the wound. Ashen flinched, and a low cry spilled from his throat, part pain, part protest. Silas nodded, confirming something only he understood. "Not a fall," he said. "Blade cut, clean slice. Someone wanted this horse crippled." The words landed heavy. Luke's breath caught. His gut knew the truth before his mind would allow it. "You saying someone did this on purpose?" "I'm saying someone knew exactly where to cut," Silas said. "A fall tears wide. This," he gestured to the narrow gash that ran like a line of hate along the fetlock. "This was drawn by hand." Luke's stomach turned. He thought of the burned barn, of Grant Delroy's cold smile when the sheriff called the blaze an accident. He saw the man again in his mind, all silver buttons and Sunday words about unfortunate losses. Luke swallowed the bitterness like grit. "You sure?" he asked, though he already knew. Silas looked up, his eyes gray as storm water. "I've seen it before." He hesitated, voice dropping. "Because I did it once." The admission hung between them, quiet and cruel. Luke's hand went to his revolver by reflex, but he didn't draw. His voice dropped low. "What did you just say?" Silas didn't flinch. "Years back, a horse was worth more than gold to the wrong kind of men. They paid me to lame it before a race. Said no one would know. I believed them. I was younger and cheaper then. The animal screamed like it knew my name." He looked away, toward the west where the sun bled into the mountains. "I've been mending things ever since." Luke's jaw tightened. "You expect me to thank you for that?" "No," Silas said simply. "Just don't waste the chance I'm giving you now." He rose, took the flask from his coat, and poured clear whiskey over the wound. The smell bit, the air. Ashen's body quivered, muscles leaping under skin slick with sweat. Luke steadied his neck, whispering, "Easy, boy, easy." Silas worked in silence. His movements were practiced, efficient, no wasted gesture. He cleaned, cut, and tied, the small noises of his tools clicking softly under the wind. Luke found himself watching the man's face, the calm lines of it, the faint tremor in the jaw that betrayed more than he said. After a while, Silas spoke again. "You came a long way for this horse." Luke nodded. "He's all I've got left." Silas's hands paused. "You married?" "Was. Once." "What happened?" Luke hesitated. "She got tired of dust and promises. Went east with her brother. I stayed because I'm worse company than land that won't grow." Silas gave a dry laugh that wasn't laughter. "The desert keeps men like us, the kind that don't know where else to go." Luke's eyes flicked toward him. "You talk like you've been out here a long time." "Long enough to learn what guilt costs," Silas said. "Long enough to wish it didn't take so much." He finished the bandage and sat back on his heels. Ashen's breathing eased, not steady yet, but less ragged. Luke brushed a hand along the gelding's mane. "Will he make it?" Silas didn't answer right away. He looked at the sky, the red sinking into violet, before replying. "Maybe, but he's fighting poison now. The fever's climbing. We need shade, water, and time. He's got one of the three." "I can get the rest," Luke said. "Then do it," Silas said. "There's a dry well 1/2 mile north. You'll find water if you dig past the salt. I'll keep him breathing." Luke hesitated. "You sure you'll be here when I get back?" Silas met his gaze. "I don't run anymore." Something in the man's voice made Luke believe him. He mounted his spare horse and rode north under the bruised sky, dust rising behind him like ghost smoke. The land stretched empty. No sign of ranch, fence, or God. Only the dry hum of locusts and the rattle of his own canteen, nearly empty. By the time he found the well, the moon was up, a dull coin behind cloud. He dropped a stone and listened. The hollow plunk that followed was weak but real. He grinned despite the ache in his chest, filled the skins, and turned back. When he returned, the fire was burning low. Silas sat beside Ashen, humming something soft. Not quite a hymn, not quite a memory. Luke poured water into a tin and held it to the horse's mouth. Ashen drank in trembling sips, foam gathering at the edges. "Good boy," Luke whispered. "That's it. You hang on." Silas watched, eyes narrowed. "He knows your voice." "He should," Luke said quietly. "It's the only one he's heard for 5 years." The night pressed in, deep and wide. Coyotes called in the distance. A lonely kind of music. Silas stirred the fire. "You've got enemies, Merritt. Whoever cut that horse will want to make sure he stays dead." Luke looked at him sharply. "You saying they'll come?" "I'm saying they already know," Silas replied. "Men like Delroy don't let old debts lie." Luke froze. "You know Delroy?" Silas poked the fire again, sparks leaping. "I know his kind. I worked for him once." The words twisted through Luke like barbed wire. "Worked for him?" Silas's eyes lifted, unreadable. "Not for long. He pays in coin and rot. When I left, I took a debt with me I've been paying ever since." Luke studied him in the firelight. "What kind of debt?" Silas looked down at his scarred hands. "The kind that doesn't stay buried." Ashen stirred, a shiver running through his flank. Luke moved to calm him, but Silas raised a hand. "Let him feel it. The fight's part of living." They sat that way, man, horse, and stranger, under the slow breath of the desert night. The moonlight traced their shapes in silver, turning pain into something almost holy. Silas finally broke the silence. "You'll need to rest. Come morning, you'll want your strength. This isn't finished." Luke nodded, exhaustion weighing his eyelids. "You'll keep watch?" "I've been keeping watch for years," Silas said softly. "Sleep, Merritt. When the sun comes, we'll see what's left to save." Luke lay down beside the fire, the heat licking the cold from his bones. The last thing he saw before sleep took him was Silas, sitting stone still, eyes on the horizon, as if waiting for a dawn he didn't trust to arrive. When Luke's dreams came, they smelled of smoke and horses, and a voice whispering through wind, not a fall, a cut. Someone wanted him crippled. And when the first thin light touched the creek bed, Luke woke to find Silas still there. But the man's expression had changed. He was staring at the horse's leg, jaw set. The bandage was wet again, not with blood this time, but with a dark, oozing poison. Silas whispered, "It's spreading faster than I thought." Luke's heart stuttered. "Then what do we do now?" Silas looked up, eyes sharp as flint. "Now," he said, "we fight it with fire." The words settled like ash. Luke blinked against the dawn, unsure if he'd heard right. Fire meant finality. Burning, searing, the last thing a man chose when there was nothing else left to try. "You sure about that?" he asked, voice rough. Silas didn't answer. He was already moving, breaking branches from a dead mesquite, stacking them into a narrow pit. He moved with purpose, a man following a map no one else could see. Luke stood, rubbing the grit from his eyes. "You burn that leg, you'll kill him." Silas struck a match and watched it flare, his expression unreadable. "If we don't, the rot will climb to his heart before noon. Choose which death you can live with." The flame caught, hungry and bright. It licked the dry wood until smoke curled upward in gray ribbons. The smell of it, sharp, familiar, brought Luke somewhere he didn't want to go. He saw fire again, not from a pit, but from a barn. His barn. The night the sky had turned orange and the screams of horses were swallowed by crackling timber. He remembered Grant Delroy standing in the yard the next morning, boots spotless, saying words of sympathy that never reached his eyes. Lightning, he'd called it. A freak storm. But Luke had known better. There'd been no rain that night, no thunder. Only the strike of greed disguised as fate. He'd spent years trying not to think of it, trying not to see what was burned away with that barn. His father's tools, his wife's ring, the last good years. And now, here he was again, about to start another fire. He clenched his fists, jaw tight. "You sure this is the only way?" Silas nodded once. "I've seen poison take slower. It always wins unless you burn it clean." Luke looked down at Ashen. The horse's sides heaved, breath shallow and hot. Sweat darkened his coat. His leg pulsed beneath the soaked bandage. Luke knelt and touched his muzzle. The skin was damp and trembling. "All right," Luke said quietly. "Do it." Silas took a piece of iron from his saddlebag, thin, blackened, bent at the end like a shepherd's hook. He slid it into the fire until the metal glowed red. The sound of it heating, the faint hiss, the pop, filled the silence like an approaching storm. Luke wrapped both arms around Ashen's neck, whispering into his ear, the way he used to when breaking him as a colt. "Easy, boy. Don't fight it. I'm right here." Silas pulled the iron free. The air shimmered around it, a low hum of heat. "Hold him," Silas said. Luke braced himself. The iron met flesh with a hiss that tore through the morning stillness. Ashen screamed, a raw, terrible sound that rose and broke across the valley. The smell of burning hair and blood hit Luke's nose, thick and metallic. He didn't look away. He couldn't. He whispered again and again, voice breaking, "I'm here, boy. I'm here." When Silas lifted the iron, the wound was no longer bleeding. It smoked, angry red edged with black. Ashen's body shook, then went still. "Breathe," Luke whispered. "Breathe, damn it." For a long moment, there was nothing. No movement. No sound but the crackle of the dying fire. Then Ashen's chest rose, slow but certain. Luke exhaled, shoulders dropping as the weight of the last minute crashed through him. Silas set the iron aside and reached for his water flask, pouring a trickle over the wound. "That'll hold the poison down," he said. "If he's got the will to stay, he'll stay." Luke sat back in the dirt, shaking. "You've done this before." Silas nodded, eyes fixed on the horizon. "More times than I'd like to remember." Luke studied him in the growing light. Silas looked different now, the hard lines of his face softened by exhaustion, by something like regret. He wasn't a cruel man, but there was a shadow behind his calm, a thing that walked with him wherever he went. Luke broke the silence first. "You said you worked for Delroy." Silas's jaw tightened. "A long time ago." "What happened?" Silas hesitated. The wind stirred his coat. "He paid me to make a horse fall before a race. Didn't tell me whose it was. I did the job clean. Later I learned the man who owned that horse lost everything because of it. A good man. One who never recovered." He looked down at his hands. "I stopped cutting horses that day. Started fixing what I could. But fixing don't erase what's been done." Luke stared at him, cold creeping into his gut. "That man, what was his name?" Silas didn't meet his eyes. "Merritt. He ran a small ranch near Ridge Creek." Luke froze. "That was my father." The words hit the air like a gunshot. Silas flinched, but didn't deny it. "I know." For a long moment, Luke couldn't speak. The earth tilted beneath him. Every memory of his father, the way he taught Luke to ride, the smell of pipe smoke in the barn, flared and burned, all tied to this man kneeling beside him. "You did that to him?" Luke whispered. Silas's face hardened. "I did what I thought was a job. I didn't know who he was until years later. I tried to find him, to make it right. By the time I did, it was too late." Luke's voice trembled. "He lost everything. He died believing he failed." "I know," Silas said quietly. "That's the kind of sin a man spends the rest of his life trying to repay. I never stopped paying." Luke stood, fists trembling. "You should have died before you touched his horse." Silas didn't move. "Maybe I should have, but if I had, no one would be here to save yours." The words struck deep. Luke wanted to hate him. God, he wanted to. But the truth of it was undeniable. Without Silas, Ashen would already be gone. He turned away, pacing. "You think saving my horse makes us even?" "No," Silas said. "It just means there's one less ghost between Kafsom, us." The air hung heavy, full of things unsaid. Luke finally spoke, low and bitter. "You took his pride, his ranch, his life, and now you show up to mend mine? What's that worth?" Silas met his eyes, calm and steady. "Worth whatever you decide it is." They stood there until the sun cleared the ridge. Light washed over them, harsh, golden, indifferent. The dust in the air shimmered, as if the world itself held its breath. Ashen shifted, tail flicking weakly. Luke turned back to him, the anger draining, replaced by something quieter. He stroked the horse's mane, whispering, "You stay with me, boy. Don't let the past take us both." Silas gathered his tools, his movements slow now, deliberate. Keep the leg cool. Change the wrap by sundown. If the swelling goes down, he'll live. If not, he let the rest hang. Luke nodded. "If not, I'll bury him proper." Silas's eyes softened. "I buried enough already." The two men worked in silence. Packing up camp, the only sounds the creak of leather and the faint hiss of the cooling iron. When the fire was out and the last of the smoke curled away, Luke looked across the plain. The air was already turning hot, and the horizon shimmered with heat. Somewhere beyond that horizon lay Ridge Creek Ranch and the man who'd started all this, Grant Delroy. Luke's hands tightened around the reins. "I'm not done with him," he said under his breath. Silas didn't argue. "Then be ready. Men like Delroy don't forget what they think they own." Luke looked down at Ashen, at the new scar blackened beneath the dust. "Neither do I." The words left his throat like smoke, soft but carrying weight. The horse shifted weakly, tail flicking at flies. The air smelled of ash and iron and something faintly sweet, like burned grass after rain. The sound of the desert returned in pieces, wind combing through sage, a hawk's cry so far away it might have been memory. Silas stood by the dying fire, rewrapping the tools in the same faded cloth. His hands were steady, but the muscles in his jaw kept ticking, a man measuring the cost of his own past with each quiet motion. "You'll have to keep him moving a little," Silas said, not looking up. "If he stays still too long, that leg'll stiffen and he'll never walk clean again." Luke gave a tired nod. "I'll walk him when the sun drops." The older man glanced up, eyes pale as river stones. "You mean if he makes it that long?" Luke stiffened but didn't answer. He ran a rough hand over Ashen's mane, feeling the coarse hair catch between his fingers. "He's got more fight than most men I've known." Silas grunted in agreement. "Then he takes after you." The compliment, if it was one, landed strangely between them. The kind that wasn't meant to warm, just to state a truth neither man could ignore. By midday, the heat turned merciless. The ground shimmered, mirage blurred. Luke poured the last of the well water into a dented pan, letting Ashen drink in slow, greedy gulps. Each swallow gave Luke a flicker of hope he didn't trust. When he looked up, Silas was squinting west, toward the ridge where the dust was rising, thin at first, then thicker, like a scar opening in the horizon. "Riders," Silas muttered. Luke followed his gaze. 3, maybe 4 figures cutting through the heat. He felt the familiar weight of his revolver at his hip. "You expecting company?" Silas shook his head. "Not the kind that rides in daylight." They moved fast, closing the distance with the casual hunger of men who'd ridden to finish something. Luke's stomach turned. He recognized the lead horse, a chestnut with white socks, Grant Delroy's mark. "Hell," Luke breathed. "He found me." Silas's eyes hardened. "He's not here for you, Merritt. He's here to make sure what he broke stays broken." Luke grabbed his rifle from the bedroll. "You telling me not to fight?" "I'm telling you to think," Silas said sharply. "You shoot one of Delroy's men, he'll have the law on you by sunset." "The law already took his side once." "That was before you had something to lose," Silas snapped. "Don't make him burn that too." Luke hesitated, watching the riders crest the ridge. The sunlight flashed off their spurs. He could almost see Delroy's grin from here, the smug tilt of a man who thought the world was a ledger with his name at the top. Ashen lifted his head weakly, nostrils flaring at the sound of approaching hooves. Luke pressed a calming hand to his neck. "Easy, boy. Not this time." Silas reached for the iron he'd used to cauterize the wound, still blackened from the morning. He plunged it back into the coals without a word. Luke frowned. "You planning to brand 'em to death?" "Planning to remind them what pain smells like," Silas said. His voice was steady, but something dangerous flickered under it. The riders slowed as they reached the creek bed. Dust settled around their boots like a curtain dropping after a bad play. Grant Delroy rode front, tall in the saddle, his white hat too clean for the country he claimed to own. "Well, I'll be damned," Delroy said, grin wide and empty. "Luke Merritt, crawling out of the desert with that sorry beast still breathing. I was starting to think you'd done the merciful thing." Luke's jaw clenched. "Mercy ain't a word you'd know." Delroy laughed, easy and cruel. "Still got a tongue on you. Thought losing your land might have tamed that some." He looked past Luke to Silas. And who's this, new stable hand? You running charity for strays now, Luke? Silas didn't answer. He just watched, the way an old wolf watches a younger one bark. Delroy leaned forward in his saddle. You should have sold that horse when you had the chance. Some things aren't worth the feed it takes to keep 'em alive. Luke felt the blood rise in his ears. You're right about one thing, he said quietly. Some things ain't for sale. Delroy's smile faltered, then came back sharper. That horse was mine once. I could have put him down myself. Instead, I let you have him out of pity. Out of pity? Luke's voice cracked like a whip. You left him cut open and dying. The air tightened. One of Delroy's men shifted in the saddle, hand drifting toward his gun. Silas moved first. He lifted the glowing iron from the coals, the heat warping the air around it. You boys might want to think before drawing, he said calmly. Last time I saw fire this close, it ate half a barn. Delroy's gaze snapped to him, recognition flickering in his eyes. Ward, he said. Didn't know you were still breathing. Not for lack of trying, Silas replied. Delroy's grin turned mean. You should have stayed gone. Men like you don't belong near decent company. Good thing there's none here, Silas said. The two stared at each other, the years between them stretching tight. Luke glanced from one to the other, confusion sliding into realization. You two know each other. Delroy laughed. Know him? Hell, I made him. Every crooked bone in that man was paid for with my coin. Silas said nothing. He didn't deny it. Luke's stomach dropped. You were his man. I was, Silas said evenly, and I've spent every day since trying not to be. Delroy looked at Luke, voice dripping with mock sympathy. Now you see what kind of savior you've found. You and your old man always had a soft spot for lost causes. Luke's hands trembled near the rifle. He could taste blood in his mouth from biting his tongue too hard. Get off my land, he said. Delroy smirked. You don't have land, Merritt. You've got dust and regret. I'll take the horse. You can keep the rest. Before Luke could move, Silas stepped forward, holding the iron between them. The heat shimmered, a living thing. Touch him, Silas said quietly, and you'll earn a mark you can't wash off. For a heartbeat, nobody breathed. Then Delroy laughed, not out of fear, but disbelief. You going to brand me, old man? Silas's voice dropped to a low growl. Only if you make me remember how. Delroy hesitated, eyes flicking to Luke, then to the iron, then back again. Finally, he spat into the dirt. This ain't over. He turned his horse, motioned for his men. The others followed, dust rising around them like smoke from a dying fire. When they were gone, Luke exhaled, every muscle shaking. You could have gotten us killed. Silas set the iron down gently, the tip still glowing faintly. No, he said. I bought us time. There's a difference. Luke knelt beside Ashen again. The horse's breathing had steadied, eyes half open, glassy but alive. He brushed his hand along the mane. You still with me, boy? Ashen blinked, a weak snort of air leaving his nostrils. Luke smiled despite himself. Behind him, Silas spoke, voice softer now. You ever wonder why I came this way, Merritt? Why I found you when I did? Luke didn't look up. I figure fate owed me one. Silas shook his head. No, it owed him. He nodded toward the horse. I came to pay what I took from your father. A fair fight. Luke turned then, eyes narrowing. You planning to fight who? Silas met his gaze. The man who taught me how to break things for money. Delroy, Luke said. Silas nodded once. Him, and everything he built. The wind picked up again, carrying the last of the smoke into the endless blue. Luke looked down at the scar across Ashen's leg. Dark, clean, final. Then we start there, he said. Silas studied him, eyes narrowed against the glare. Start what? Luke rose slowly, his body aching from too much sun, too little water, and too many ghosts. You said you owe a debt, he said. Well, so do I. Delroy's taken enough from this land. From me. From my father. He's due a reckoning. Silas looked toward the ridge where Delroy and his men had disappeared. Reckonings don't pay well, Merritt. They just cost different. Luke tightened the cinch on his saddle. Then I'll pay in full. The day stretched long and brutal. The sun burned white over the plains, turning every shadow into a thin bruise. Ashen walked stiffly beside Luke, his step uneven but steady. Every few yards the gelding stumbled, then caught himself again. Luke murmured quiet words that weren't quite prayers, weren't quite promises. They followed a dry wash north, toward the line of cottonwoods that marked the edge of Delroy's spread. Luke had ridden that country once as a hired hand, before Delroy bought it out from under the men who built it. Before Luke's father was forced to sell off their last 50 acres, the land was still the same, wide, cruel, beautiful, the kind of beauty that demanded something in return. Silas walked a few paces behind, silent except for the creak of his gear. The man seemed lighter somehow since the fire, as though the truth between them had burned something else away too. But Luke could feel the tension coiled beneath that calm. Every step brought them closer to Delroy's world, and Silas wore that knowledge like a weight across his shoulders. By late afternoon, they reached a stretch of prairie cut through by a narrow creek. Luke dropped his reins and crouched to drink. The water was warm, metallic, but wet enough to matter. Ashen lowered his head beside him, and for a long moment the world was just sound. The lapping of water, the whisper of wind, the sigh of a living thing that wasn't ready to quit. You sure he's strong enough for this? Silas asked, nodding at the horse. He'll hold, Luke said. He's got reason to. Then you'd better give him one more, Silas said quietly, because Delroy won't stop with words next time. Luke wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. I'm counting on it. They made camp as the sun slipped behind the hills. The fire was small, just enough to boil coffee. The light painted the dust in copper and turned their faces into shadows. You ever kill a man? Luke asked suddenly. Silas didn't flinch. Once, maybe twice, depending on how you measure it. Luke looked across the fire. And you still sleep at night? Sometimes. Other nights, I just wait for morning. Luke nodded slowly. I don't plan to kill Delroy. Not yet. Silas's brow lifted. Then what's the plan? Luke poked at the fire, sending sparks into the dark. I want him to lose something first. Something he can't buy back. Silas leaned forward. You're talking about his herd. I'm talking about his pride, Luke said. Same thing to a man like him. Silas's mouth curved in something close to a smile. You're your father's son, all right. He used to think justice was something you could dig out of the dirt if you worked hard enough. Was he wrong? No, Silas said, staring into the flames. Just too early. Night deepened. The wind died. Somewhere far off, a coyote cried once and was answered. Luke lay back on his bedroll, hat tilted low over his eyes. The firelight flickered across Ashen's scarred leg, a brand not of ownership, but of survival. He whispered, Rest easy, boy. We'll ride come morning. When sleep came, it wasn't gentle. It brought dreams of hoofbeats pounding through smoke, of firelight turning barns into pyres, of his father's voice calling through the noise. Don't let him take what's left. Luke woke to silence so deep it rang in his ears. The stars had faded to a thin blue haze, and dawn was trying to find its way over the horizon. Silas was already awake, crouched near the ashes of the fire, his hands busy tying a bundle of herbs into thin strips of cloth. What's that? Luke asked. Something to keep the fever down, Silas said, nodding toward Ashen. If we're going to make Delroy bleed, the horse needs to stand. Luke smiled faintly. You've got a way of talking that makes vengeance sound like medicine. Silas shrugged. Maybe it is. They saddled up before the sun cleared the ridge. The morning air was cool, laced with the scent of sage and smoke. They rode hard and quiet, the sound of hooves muffled in dust. The plains rolled out before them, endless and golden. By noon, they reached the high pasture. From there, they could see Delroy's ranch spread wide below, corrals, bunkhouses, and the white-painted house that sat like a crown above it all. In the distance, his herd moved like a tide, hundreds of heads dark against the light. Luke pulled his horse up, eyes hard. You ever seen something so wrong look that proud? Silas followed his gaze. That's the trouble with the world, Merritt. It don't know when it's lying. Luke's grip tightened on the reins. He bought this place with my father's money, stole it out from under us while we were still mourning him. Silas said nothing. He didn't need to. They watched the herd for a long time. Watched the dust rise, watched the men ride the fences, watched the empire of a man who believed himself untouchable. Finally, Luke spoke. If I can take one thing from him, it'll be this: his cattle, his name, his peace. Silas nodded. Then we start tonight. Luke turned. You sure about that? Delroy rides into town every Thursday, Silas said. Leaves the foreman in charge, a drunk named Reddick, easy to spook. Luke frowned. You been keeping tabs on him? Old habits, Silas said, and for the first time, there was a shadow of pride in his voice. They planned as the afternoon bled into dusk. Every step was measured, where the guards rode, when the lanterns dimmed, where the fences met the open trail. It was a plan stitched out of desperation and memory. When the last light faded, they moved. The prairie turned silver under the moon. The only sound was the rhythm of hooves and the low hiss of the wind through the grass. They reached the far edge of Delroy's herd just before midnight. Luke dismounted, moving slow and careful. The cattle shifted restlessly, their breath steaming in the chill. He whispered to Ashen, "Stay close, boy. Quiet now." Silas handed him a lantern, its flame hooded. "We cut the fence, drive 50 head north. It'll look like rustlers. He'll chase ghosts for days." Luke nodded. "And by then, we'll be long gone." They worked fast, slicing through wire and guiding the cattle with soft whistles. Dust rose like fog, muffling sound and light. Luke's heart hammered with every step. Then, a shout. From the dark, a voice cracked the night. "Who the hell's out there?" A lantern flared at the far end of the pen. Another, closer. Silas hissed, "Run!" The herd startled, surging forward in a sudden wave. Luke grabbed Ashen's reins and swung up. Hooves thundered as the cattle broke through the fence, a river of muscle and sound pouring into the open plain. Gunfire split the air. One shot, then another. Sparks leapt off the rocks near Luke's boots. He pressed low against the saddle. "Go, boy!" Ashen ran, not fast, not clean, but with the stubborn rhythm of a creature that refused to fall. The wind tore at Luke's coat, the night alive with chaos and dust. Behind him, Silas shouted something lost to the roar. Then another shot rang out, closer this time, and Luke turned just in time to see Silas stumble from the saddle. "Silas!" he shouted. The old man hit the ground hard, rolling into the shadow of a mesquite. Luke wheeled Ashen around, heart in his throat. The cattle thundered past, the noise fading into the dark. He slid off the horse and dropped beside Silas. The man's face was pale under the moonlight. Blood bloomed dark across his shirt. Luke pressed his hands to the wound. "Stay with me, you old bastard." Silas managed a faint grin. "Told you? Reckonings cost different. Luke's eyes burned. Don't you die on me now. We're just getting started. But Silas's gaze had already turned distant, fixed somewhere Luke couldn't follow. The wind shifted, carrying the faint sound of hooves far away, the herd running free across the plain. And in that silence that followed, Luke realized two things. Delroy had lost his peace, and Luke had just lost the only man who could teach him what to do next. The night pressed down, thick and endless. The wind had died with Silas's last breath, leaving only the sound of the herd fading into the distance, hooves beating like the echo of a heart that refused to stop. Luke knelt beside the old man's body, his palms slick with blood that was already cooling under the desert air. "Silas," he whispered, the word falling apart before it could finish. Ashen stood a few feet away, sides heaving, the moonlight turning his coat into a dull sheen of silver and ash. He snorted once as if asking what came next. Luke had no answer. He stayed there until the stars began to shift, the horizon paling with dawn. The blood on his hands dried to rust. The world around him felt suspended, every cactus, every stone, every shadow holding its breath. When he finally moved, it was with a quiet purpose. He found a patch of ground beneath a mesquite and began to dig. The soil was hard and stony, and every shovelful scraped like guilt. He didn't stop until the sun climbed above the ridge and sweat blurred his vision. When the grave was done, Luke laid Silas down with care. He folded the man's coat beneath his head and placed the iron brand, the same one that had saved Ashen, at his side. It still held a faint black shine, as though it remembered its last work. "You paid what you owed," Luke said softly. "Now it's my turn." He covered the grave in silence, his movements slow, almost reverent. When the last stone was set, he stood back, hat in hand. The wind rose again, just enough to stir the dust over the mound. It sounded almost like a sigh. Then Luke turned toward the east, where Delroy's ranch still slept in the golden light. The ride back was long and punishing. The sun blazed without mercy, and Ashen's limp grew worse with each mile. But Luke didn't stop. Each step carried the weight of a man who had run out of places to run. By midday, he reached the edge of Ridge Creek. The land there was split by gullies and scrub, the kind of country only desperate men crossed. He made camp beneath a stand of cottonwoods and tended to Ashen's leg. The wound looked angry, but the flesh was holding. The scar, dark and jagged, was healing into something permanent. Luke poured a little water over it, speaking under his breath. "You and me, we ain't done yet. Not till he knows what loss feels like." Ashen flicked an ear, as if in answer. Luke sat back, watching the sunlight flash off the silver buckle on his saddle. Silas's words echoed in his head. Reckonings cost different. He hadn't understood then. He did now. Every mile ahead would demand a piece of him. As the day waned, he rode south into town. Ridge Creek was the kind of place that looked tired even in daylight. One street, a saloon leaning sideways, a few stores with windows clouded by dust. The townsfolk watched, from porches as Luke passed, their stares wary, curious. They remembered his name, even if they didn't say it. He stopped at the blacksmith's, slid from the saddle, and tied Ashen to the rail. The smith, a burly man with a soot-streaked face, squinted at him. "Ain't seen you in a spell, Merritt. Heard tell you lost near everything." Luke nodded once. "Not everything." The man's eyes dropped to Ashen's leg. "Looks bad." "He'll live," Luke said. "Need your forge." The blacksmith frowned. "You fixing to shoe him?" Luke looked toward the smoldering coals and the rack of tools beside them. "Something like that." The man hesitated, then stepped aside. "Ain't my place to ask." Luke worked in silence. He heated a brand in the coals not for marking cattle, but for memory. He pressed it into a small piece of iron, shaping the edges until they formed the initials SW. When he finished, he let it cool, then wrapped it in cloth and tucked it into his coat pocket. Outside, the wind was shifting again, carrying the smell of dust and distance. Luke mounted up, touched the brim of his hat to the smith, and rode toward the churchyard. The preacher, a thin man with hollow cheeks, stood sweeping the front steps. He looked up as Luke approached. "Haven't seen you on a Sunday in years." Luke dismounted. "Didn't come for preaching." The preacher eyed the dirt and blood on Luke's clothes. "You look like a man carrying ghosts." "Maybe I am," Luke said. "You got room for one more in your prayers?" The preacher nodded slowly. "Always." Luke handed him a few coins, all he had left. "Name's Silas Ward. Buried him north of the ridge. If anyone asks, tell them he was a good man." The preacher studied him. "Was he?" Luke's jaw tightened. "He was trying to be." As he turned to leave, the preacher called out, "You'll find no peace chasing the man who made that grave." Luke paused. Peace don't factor into it. He rode out of town as the sky began to bruise purple. He followed the trail west, the same one Delroy used to ride his cattle to market. The tracks were fresh, Delroy's men heading home. Night fell fast. Crickets filled the gaps where words should have been. Luke stopped near an old windmill and made a small fire, feeding it slow until it whispered instead of roared. He pulled the wrapped iron from his pocket and set it on the ground. "You got your mark now, Silas," he said softly. "Next, he gets his." Ashen shifted nearby, resting his weight on the good leg. The firelight caught in his eyes, turning them into mirrors. Luke leaned back against the saddle, watching the stars blink awake. The ache in his chest dulled to something steady, not peace but purpose. He could live with that. When sleep came, it was filled with voices. Silas's voice, his father's, the low hum of memory that sounded almost like forgiveness. He woke before dawn to the sound of hooves in the distance. Not cattle this time. Riders. 3 of them. Coming fast. Luke put out the fire with his boot and reached for his rifle. He touched Ashen's neck once, a silent signal between them. "All right, boy," he whispered. "Looks like morning came early." As the first light broke over the ridge, the riders crested the hill, Delroy's foreman at the lead, his face twisted into a grin. Luke swung into the saddle. The wind caught his hat brim and lifted the dust from the earth in a single, slow swirl. "Come on," he said, spurring Ashen forward. "Let's finish what we started." The sound of the wind rose around them, a whisper turning into a roar, the kind that meant something was about to change. The first rider crested the ridge, rifle flashing in the new light. Behind him came 2 more, their coats flapping like tattered flags. Luke felt the old ache in his chest settle into something steady. Not fear, not even anger. Just a quiet, sharpened purpose. Ashen shifted beneath him, muscles trembling with effort. The gelding's leg wasn't healed, but he moved with a will that refused to bow. Luke leaned forward, whispering, "We'll make it count, boy. Just hold together." The wind carried the riders' voices, laughter, taunts, the metallic rattle of spurs. They thought they were chasing a man broken by loss. They were wrong. Luke turned Ashen toward the gulch that cut through the land like an old wound. The walls there were steep, the ground soft from spring runoff. It wasn't a place for running. It was a place for endings. They thundered into the canyon, dust spiraling in their wake. The echo of hooves bounced off the stone like gunfire. Luke could feel Ashen's heartbeat under him, quick and fierce. When they reached the narrow bend where the trail split, Luke pulled up and swung from the saddle. He crouched low, dragging his rifle from the scabbard. Ashen stood trembling, eyes wide and white-edged. "Stay," Luke whispered. "You hear me? Stay." He climbed the rocks, boots scraping against sandstone. From the ledge, he saw the riders closing in, 3 shadows against the glare. He recognized the one in front. Reddick, Delroy's foreman. A man built from whiskey and cruelty, the kind who'd laugh while cutting a horse's leg to win a bet. Luke steadied his breath. The rifle felt cold and sure in his hands. He didn't want to kill, so not if there was another way. But the world rarely offered one. The first shot cracked through the canyon like thunder. Stones splintered near Reddick's horse, sending the animal rearing. Reddick cursed, wheeling around. "It's him!" one of the others shouted. The second man fired blind into the rocks, the shot ricocheting harmlessly off the canyon wall. Luke ducked behind cover, reloading. Then, a sound behind him. The faint crunch of gravel. He spun, rifle raised, and froze. A young deputy stood there, barely 20, badge pinned crooked on his vest. His eyes were wide, his gun trembling in his hand. "Don't," Luke said quietly. "You're not here for this." The kid swallowed hard. "Delroy sent us, said you stole his herd." "Did he tell you why?" The deputy hesitated, eyes flicking toward the canyon below. "He said you killed one of his men." Luke's jaw tightened. "He's lying. And if you keep following him, you'll learn what kind of man he really is, the hard way." "I can't let you go," the deputy said, voice breaking. "You know that." Luke lowered the barrel of his rifle. "Then don't follow. Not today." For a moment, neither moved. The air between them was taut as wire. Then the deputy's eyes shifted past Luke, down to Ashen waiting below, one leg wrapped in rough cloth. Something in the sight must have hit him deep. He swallowed again, voice quieter now. "That horse, he's Delroy's, ain't he?" Luke shook his head. "He was. Not anymore." The boy nodded once, small, almost imperceptible, then stepped back, holstering his pistol. "You've got 5 minutes before I tell the others I lost you." Luke held his gaze. "That's more mercy than most would give." The deputy shrugged, a flicker of shame crossing his face. "Just don't make me regret it." Then he was gone, slipping down the rocks the way he came. Luke watched him go, something like hope stirring for the first time in days. Maybe not everyone out here was rotten through. Below, Reddick was shouting orders, his men spreading out along the canyon floor. Luke ducked lower and scanned the ridge. A narrow trail curved up behind him, leading to a cluster of boulders that overlooked the pass. If he could draw them there, he might buy himself and Ashen enough time to escape. He fired again, a warning shot that sent the men scrambling for cover. Dust plumed around them. Reddick yelled, "You think you can hide forever, Merritt? We'll drag you out and hang you beside that crippled horse of yours." Luke's reply was calm, almost steady. "You can try." He darted along the ridge, boots sliding on loose shale. The sun was full overhead now, beating down like judgment. When he reached the top, he crouched behind a boulder and sighted down the rifle once more. But the next sound he heard wasn't gunfire. It was Ashen. The horse was calling, sharp and terrified. Luke's stomach dropped. He peered over the edge and saw one of Reddick's men, the third rider, had circled around. He was by Ashen now, rope in hand, trying to drag the gelding toward the canyon wall. "No!" Luke shouted, his voice echoing like a cannon blast. He fired, one clean shot. The man dropped, the rope falling loose. Ashen reared, the sudden motion tearing open the half-healed wound. Blood streaked down his leg, black in the sunlight. Luke's heart cracked open. "God, no!" He scrambled down the rocks, slipping, sliding, hands scraped raw. Reddick saw him and fired. The bullet tore past Luke's arm, close enough to singe. Luke returned fire, not to kill, but to drive him back. Dust clouded the air, turning every breath to grit. When he reached Ashen, the horse was on his knees, trembling, trying to rise. Luke dropped the rifle and knelt beside him, hands on his neck. Easy, boy. Don't fight. Just breathe. The wound pulsed again, blood dark and slow. Luke pressed his hand over it, desperate. Stay with me, he whispered. Please. Ashen's eyes rolled white. His breath came in ragged bursts. The sound was terrible, the sound of something sacred breaking. Reddick's boots crunched closer. Luke looked up, rage boiling into his chest. The man grinned, revolver cocked. Should have stayed gone, Merritt. Delroy said I could have the horse once I was done with you. Luke rose, every line of him trembling. You'll touch him over my dead body. Reddick smirked. That's the idea. The next moment came fast. 2 gunshots, almost one. The sound ricocheted through the canyon like thunder tearing the sky. Reddick staggered, eyes wide, clutching his chest. Then he fell. Smoke curled from Luke's revolver. He stood there, chest heaving, the echo of the shot rolling out until it vanished into the wind. For a long time there was nothing. No sound, no movement. Just the smell of gunpowder and blood. Then Luke turned back to Ashen. The gelding was lying still now, head resting in the dirt, eyes half-lidded. Luke dropped to his knees again, hands shaking. Don't you quit. Not now. Ashen's breath fluttered, once, twice, and then steadied. Faint, but steady. Luke pressed his forehead against the horse's neck, a single tear cutting through the dust on his cheek. That's it, boy. We're not done. Not yet. Above them, thunder rolled. Distant, promising rain. Luke holstered his gun and looked toward the horizon. The world smelled of iron and storm, and something close to change. Delroy, he said quietly, I'm coming for you next. The wind answered, carrying the promise away, turning it into something that sounded like fate. Clouds had been gathering all morning, thick and low, rolling over the high plains like a herd of slow beasts. The smell of rain came first, sharp and electric, cutting through the scent of gunpowder and dust that still clung to Luke's clothes. He stood at the mouth of the canyon, staring down at the body of Reddick sprawled in the dirt. The man's face was half hidden beneath the shadow of his own hat. The desert had already begun its quiet work, pulling him back into the earth. Luke didn't say a prayer. Men like Reddick had never believed in grace, and Luke didn't have any left to spare. He just turned away. Ashen limped behind him, his gait uneven but determined. The bandage around his leg was soaked through again, but he didn't falter. There was something in the horse's eyes, a reflection of Luke's own exhaustion and defiance. They climbed out of the canyon as the first drops began to fall. At first it was soft, like the land was being forgiven in whispers. Then came the thunder, deep, rolling, angry. By the time they reached the ridge, the storm had broken wide open. Rain fell hard, washing away blood, dust, and everything that had come before. Luke didn't seek shelter. He let it soak through him. The cold, the sting, the cleansing weight of it all. Ashen shuddered beside him, head low against the wind. Luke pulled his coat around the horse's neck, pressing his forehead to the animal's damp mane. You hold on, boy, he said softly. We're close now. Lightning split the sky, bright as truth. For a heartbeat, Luke saw the valley stretched out below, Delroy's ranch house gleaming white even through the rain. The sight of it hit like a fist. He remembered his father standing in that same valley years ago, pointing toward the hills where the fence line ended. One day, this'll all be ours, Luke, land that answers to no man. That promise had burned with the barn. Luke's jaw tightened. Not anymore. He rode through the storm, the world reduced to gray and noise. The rain beat down until the ground turned to rivers. Every step forward felt stolen from something stronger, time pain, or maybe fate itself. When they reached the outskirts of town, the streets were empty, windows shuttered, lamps guttered out. Only the saloon still showed life, a flicker of yellow light behind warped glass. Luke dismounted and tied Ashen beneath the awning. The horse stood with his head bowed, water dripping from his mane. Luke brushed his muzzle once, voice low. "Rest. I won't be long." Inside, the saloon smelled of whiskey, smoke, and wet leather. A handful of men huddled near the bar, their talk dying the moment Luke stepped in. He walked straight to the counter. The barkeep, a thick man with eyes like dull coins, hesitated before reaching for a bottle. "You look like hell, Merritt." Luke took the glass, poured it full, and drank. "You seen Delroy?" The barkeep's hand froze. "Not since last night. He was riding for his spread this morning. Words he ain't happy." "About what?" Luke asked. "About his herd scattered halfway to the border. About his foreman not answering his calls." The barkeep leaned closer, voice dropping. "And about a man named Luke Merritt being seen near the ridge." Luke set the glass down, the sound sharp. "Then he'll come looking." "Or he'll send someone," the man warned. "Delroy don't dirty his own hands if he can buy someone else's." Luke gave a humorless smile. "Then he's about to run out of buyers." He turned and walked out before anyone could stop him. The rain hit harder now, coming down in sheets. Ashen lifted his head as Luke approached, eyes bright despite the storm. "Time to finish it," Luke said. They rode through mud and lightning, the sound of hooves muffled by water. The closer they came to Delroy's ranch, the more the land changed. Fences high, barns freshly painted, cattle clustered in the distance under the watch of hired guns. Luke stopped just beyond the last fence post, studying the house through the curtain of rain. It was a big place, too big for one man's soul. He slipped from the saddle, checked his rifle, and started forward on foot. Ashen followed a few steps, then stopped, snorting softly. Luke turned, meeting the horse's gaze. "Stay here. If I don't come back, you find your way to open ground. You hear?" Ashen didn't move, only blinked against the rain. Luke smiled faintly. "Yeah, I didn't think you'd listen." He moved through the yard like a shadow. The rain covered his steps, drumming on the roof, the fence, the tin troughs by the stable. He saw light spilling from the main house window, silhouettes moving inside. He crept closer, his breath loud in his own ears. Inside the parlor, Delroy stood by the fire, coat half off, glass of brandy in hand. His voice carried even through the storm. "Said he killed Reddick himself," Delroy was saying. "Ain't a man alive crosses me twice and keeps his name." One of his men spoke from the corner. "You want us to bring him in?" Delroy smiled, slow, cruel. "No, I want him to see what happens when he takes what's mine. Burn what's left of his old place. That'll draw him out." Luke's chest tightened. He pictured Silas's grave, the barn that once stood where his father taught him to ride. He thought of all the things Delroy had burned, and all the things he hadn't yet paid for. He stepped into the doorway, rifle raised. "You've burned enough." The room froze. Delroy turned slowly, disbelief flickering into amusement. "Well, look what the rain washed in." "Put the glass down," Luke said. Delroy chuckled and took another sip. "You really think you can walk in here and end this? You're standing on my land, Merritt. Everything under this roof. Every hoof, every acre. It's mine." Luke's voice was steady. "Not the ground under your boots." Delroy frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" Before Luke could answer, a sound split the storm, the sharp, broken cry of a horse. Ashen. Delroy's men turned toward the window. "He's got a horse out there," one said. Delroy's eyes narrowed. Then bring it in, I'll finish what I started. Luke fired before the words finished leaving his mouth. The shot shattered the brandy glass, the echo swallowed by thunder. The room erupted, shouting, splintering wood, gunfire flashing like lightning indoors. Luke dove behind the table, returning fire, heart hammering in rhythm with the storm. Outside, Ashen screamed again, a sound that cut through everything. Luke's world narrowed to a single thought. Not again. He bolted for the door as bullets tore through the walls. The rain hit him like a wall, blinding, cold. Through the haze he saw them, two of Delroy's men struggling to rope Ashen, the horse fighting wild, eyes rolling white. Luke shouted, firing once, then again. One man fell, the other fled into the dark. Ashen stumbled, blood streaking his flank, but he stayed upright. Luke ran to him, grabbing the reins, whispering his name over and over. It's all right, boy. I've got you. I've got you. Behind him, the front door slammed open. Delroy stepped out, pistol raised, rain dripping from his hat brim. This is where it ends, he said. Luke turned, rain running down his face like tears he didn't have left. Yeah, he said. It is. Thunder rolled overhead. Lightning flashed. Only one gun fired. When the light faded, Delroy was on his knees, gun slipping from his hand. He looked up at Luke with disbelief more than pain. You should have stayed broken. Luke holstered his revolver, voice low. You should have stayed human. Delroy's body crumpled into the mud. The rain didn't stop. Luke stood there for a long time, the storm washing the world clean. Then he turned to Ashen, who was swaying but still on his feet. He pressed his forehead against the horse's neck, feeling the steady beat of life beneath the skin. It's over, Luke whispered. We can go home now. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of wet earth and cedar, the kind of smell that promised something new might grow, even out of ruin. And for the first time in a long while, Luke believed it. The rain had slowed to a mist, soft as breath. Smoke still curled from Delroy's house, the kind that came not from fire, but from something deeper ending. The man who'd cast a shadow across Ridge Creek for years lay silent now, his empire dissolving into mud. Luke stood in the yard, soaked through, his hands shaking more from exhaustion than victory. Ashen stood a few paces away, his chest heaving, head low but unbroken. The sight of that horse still breathing felt like the only truth left that mattered. Luke holstered his gun and looked to the sky. The storm had passed. Light was breaking through the clouds, faint at first, then growing, streaks of gold crawling across the horizon like the world was trying to remember how to shine again. He took a long breath. The air was cleaner than it had been in years. From behind the barn, a door creaked open. Two ranch hands stepped out, hands raised, eyes wide with fear. They were young, no older than Luke had been when his father still ran the ridge. We don't want no trouble, one stammered. We just work here. Luke nodded. You got families? The man swallowed. Some of us, down in town. Then go home, Luke said. This place don't belong to him anymore. It don't belong to me either. The men hesitated, then looked at each other before hurrying off toward the hills. Their shapes faded into the mist until they were nothing but ghosts heading somewhere better. Luke turned back to the house. The door hung crooked, the floor inside slick with rain and blood. He stepped over the threshold anyway, boots echoing hollow against the boards. The fire in the hearth had burned low, throwing long shadows across the walls. Above the mantel hung a photograph, a younger Delroy, standing beside a horse with a mark Luke recognized. The same horse his father had once bred, the one Delroy had ruined to win a race. Luke stared at it for a long time. Then he reached up, took the frame down, and set it face down on the table. Not anymore, he murmured. Outside, Ashen neighed softly, the sound low but steady. Luke walked back out, rain dripping from the eaves. The horse turned his head toward him, one ear flicking forward. "You ready to go home, boy?" Luke asked. Ashen blinked, as if the word home was something that needed time to understand. The ride back to Ridge Creek was slow, the land shining wet and new under the soft sun. Every mile felt heavier now that the noise had stopped. No gunfire, no shouting, just wind and memory. They passed Silas's grave by midday. The mound was soaked, the dirt darker, the wildflowers flattened by rain. Luke dismounted and knelt beside it, brushing the mud from the marker he'd built. "I did what you couldn't," he said quietly, "but it cost about the same." He pulled the small iron brand from his coat, the one marked with Silas's initials. The edges had rusted a little, but the letters were still clear. He set it at the base of the grave, pressed deep into the earth. "There," he said. "Now it's done." A breeze moved through the mesquite, soft and cool. For a moment, it sounded like someone breathing again after a long time underwater. Luke stood, his knees aching. "Rest easy, old man. You earned it." When he mounted again, the sky had cleared completely. The air shimmered with the kind of light that comes only after storms, fragile, honest. Ashen's limp was worse, but he still walked. Luke let him choose the pace. The rhythm of the horse's uneven steps became its own kind of song, slow, steady, alive. By the time they reached the old Merritt place, the sun was sinking low, the fields awash in amber light. The barn was nothing but blackened ribs of timber, half swallowed by grass. The house, though, still stood, small, stubborn, and waiting. Luke dismounted, his boots sinking into the soft ground. He ran a hand along the porch rail, feeling the grooves his father had carved there years ago. "For luck," the old man used to say. Luck. Maybe it was something that didn't belong to men like them, just something they borrowed when the world allowed it. Luke led Ashen into what was left of the barn. The horse hesitated at the threshold, as if remembering too much. Luke spoke gently. "It's all right now. No more fire. No more running." Inside, the air smelled of wet wood and ash. Luke found a dry corner, spread what hay was left, and eased Ashen down. The horse groaned but settled, eyes closing halfway. Luke rubbed his neck until the trembling eased. "You did good," Luke whispered. "You brought us both back." He sat beside him, back against the beam, watching the last light fade through the cracks in the roof. The quiet pressed close, not empty, but full of all the things that had been waiting to be heard. When the stars came out, Luke finally spoke again, his voice barely above the whisper of the wind. "You know, Pa used to say the land remembers. Every hoofprint, every promise, every mistake." He looked toward the horizon. "Maybe now it'll remember something better." Ashen stirred, his breath slow and deep. Luke smiled, tired and small. "Yeah, maybe us." The night deepened, the crickets starting their slow, steady song. Somewhere far off, thunder grumbled. Not a storm, just the echo of one passing. Luke leaned his head back, eyes closing. The ache in his body was still there, but the restlessness that had followed him for years was gone. He wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring. Maybe rebuilding, maybe leaving, maybe nothing at all. But for the first time, that didn't scare him. He had the land. He had the sky. He had one living soul who'd stayed when no one else did. And that was enough. As he drifted toward sleep, the wind moved through the broken boards above, whispering softly through the dark. The sound of a world trying to heal. When Luke woke, the world was quiet in a way it hadn't been for years. Morning light crept through the cracks in the barn roof, laying stripes of gold across the dirt floor. Ashen stirred beside him, the horse's breath steady and soft. Luke reached out, brushed a hand along the gelding's neck, and felt the warmth of life beneath his fingers. "You made it, boy," he said, voice rough with sleep. "Guess that makes two of us." Outside, the land shimmered after the storm. The grass was greener, the air cleaner. For the first time in a long while, Ridge Creek smelled alive. Luke stepped into the light, the boards creaking under his boots. The hills beyond still carried scars, charred fence posts, the skeleton of the barn his father built. But even those looked different now, softened under the sun. He walked to the well. The rope was frayed, the bucket half-rotted, but when he dropped it down, it came back full. The water was cold and clear, untouched by fire or time. He drank deeply, then poured the rest into his hands for Ashen, who drank in slow, grateful sips. "Easy," Luke murmured. "Plenty more where that came from." The sound of approaching hoofbeats broke the calm. Luke turned, hand instinctively brushing his hip, though his gun felt heavier now than it ever had before. A single rider emerged over the hill, the young deputy from the canyon, hat pulled low against the light. His horse was chestnut, mud-caked from the ride. When he reached the yard, he slowed to a stop, raising one hand in greeting. "Merritt," he said. "Heard there was trouble out this way." Luke met his gaze. "You heard right." The deputy slid off his horse, eyes scanning the place. "Delroy's dead. Word's traveling fast." Luke didn't answer. The young man shifted, uneasy. "They'll be sending a marshal from Cheyenne to sort it out. Folks'll want to know what happened." "Then tell 'em," Luke said. "Tell 'em a man finally paid what he owed." The deputy looked down, kicking at the dirt. "That might not be how the law sees it." Luke half smiled. "Law's late to most reckonings." For a moment, neither spoke. The breeze moved through the grass, whispering low. The deputy finally cleared his throat. "I saw the grave up north. Silas Ward. You buried him?" Luke nodded once. "He saved more than he broke. World can remember him that way." The deputy hesitated. "You plan to stay?" Luke looked around. At the sagging porch, the fence half buried in grass, the wide sky above it all. Was thinking about it. "You'll need help." "I'll manage." The deputy smiled, small but genuine. "Nobody manages out here, Mr. Merritt. Not alone." He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a folded paper. "Marshall'll be here in a few days. I'm supposed to ask you to come into town, make a statement. But between you and me," he glanced at Ashen, "you've done enough riding for one lifetime." Luke took the paper but didn't unfold it. "Appreciate the warning." The deputy tipped his hat. "I'll tell him I couldn't find you." Luke's eyes softened. "Why?" "Because you gave me 5 minutes once," the boy said. "Figure I owe you one back." Luke nodded, quiet gratitude in the look. "You ride safe, son." The deputy turned and mounted up. "You too, Merritt. World's short on men who keep their word." Then he was gone, a small trail of dust rising behind him. Luke stood there a long while after, watching until the sound of hooves faded into the horizon. By afternoon, he was working again, fixing the porch rail, clearing debris from the barn, mending what could still hold. Each nail he drove, each plank he lifted, felt like an act of memory. The rhythm steadied him. Not penance, not redemption, just life moving forward, the only way it knew how. Ashen watched from the shade, the bandaged leg stretched out. Every so often he'd snort, impatient, as if reminding Luke that he wasn't the only one with stubborn bones. All right," Luke said, smiling for the first time in what felt like years. "We'll stretch those legs soon enough." That evening, as the sun went down, Luke saddled Ashen again. The horse limped but didn't falter. They rode slow to the top of the ridge overlooking the valley. The land spread out before them. Greener now, almost forgiving. The wind moved through the grass in waves, bending it like prayer. Luke took off his hat, ran a hand through his hair, and let the breeze touch his face. "This was it, huh?" he said softly. "All that fighting. And it was just to stand here again." Ashen shifted, nudging his shoulder. Luke laughed under his breath. "Guess you're right. Still beats where we were." They stayed there until the light faded. The first stars came out, pale and trembling. Luke thought of his father, of Silas, of all the things that had burned away to make room for this quiet. When they rode back down, the house looked different in the dusk. Not broken, but waiting. The air smelled of pine sap and clean dirt. Somewhere nearby, a whippoorwill called, its song low and steady. Luke dismounted and patted Ashen's neck. "Tomorrow we build a fence. Maybe plant something." The horse blew softly, warm air against his hand. Luke smiled. "Yeah, I know. You don't dig, I get it." He turned toward the barn, the soft lamplight spilling through the cracks like gold threads in old wood. And for the first time, Ridge Creek didn't feel haunted. It felt alive, fragile, unfinished, but alive. Luke walked to the doorway, paused, and looked back at the dark horizon. "You can rest now, Pa. I'll take it from here." The wind moved through the fields once more, quiet, patient, carrying the smell of rain long gone. Then Luke stepped inside, closed the door behind him, and let the silence of the new world settle into his bones. For the first time in years, that silence didn't feel empty. It had weight to it, like the land itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what came next. The storm had passed, the killing was done, and what remained was this: the slow rhythm of a man learning to live again. Luke lit the lamp and set it on the table. Its glow painted the room in soft amber, touching the cracked walls, the half-fallen shelves, and the photograph that had somehow survived all these years, a faded image of his father, standing beside the same barn that now lay in ruin. He stared at it for a long moment, then said quietly, "Guess we're even now, old man." Outside, the wind brushed against the windows, soft and steady. Ashen's hooves shifted against the barn floor, that familiar sound grounding him in a way words never could. Over the next few days, Luke fell into a rhythm. Dawn meant mending fences. Noon meant hauling water from the well. And every evening he sat by the barn, watching the sun dip behind the ridge. The world moved on, slow and certain, as it always had. The townsfolk started coming by one. First it was the blacksmith, bringing nails and a new rope. Then the preacher, quiet as always, offering a jar of honey and a single word: peace. Even the young deputy returned, riding in one morning with a bundle of letters. "Marshal cleared you," he said, handing over the papers. "They're calling it self-defense." Luke nodded, his voice low. "Guess that's something." The deputy smiled faintly. "More than most men get in these parts." He lingered, looking at the rebuilt fences, the new boards on the porch. "You fixing to stay for good?" Luke looked out across the land. The grass had begun to grow again where the fire once burned. Wildflowers dotted the field like tiny flames refusing to die out. "I reckon I'll see what the land decides," he said. The deputy nodded, tipped his hat, and rode off. The sound of hooves faded slow, swallowed by the wind. That night, Luke sat beside Ashen in the barn. The horse was lying down now, legs still scarred but healing clean. Luke brushed his coat, the strokes slow and even. "You know," he said softly, "if you hadn't come back that night, none of this would have happened." Ashen flicked an ear, eyes half closed. Luke smiled. Yeah, you probably saved me more than I saved you. He sat there until the lamplight burned low, listening to the rhythm of the horse's breathing. Somewhere far off, thunder murmured again. Not the kind that brought storms, but the kind that reminded you storms would always return. He thought about Silas, about the strange mercy that had brought the man into his life, and the price he'd paid for it. You were right, Luke whispered into the dark. Reckonings cost different. The next morning came with color. The sky stretched wide and clean, streaked with pale gold. Luke saddled Ashen slowly, testing the horse's leg. Ashen shifted, wobbled once, then found his footing. That's it, Luke said, smiling. Let's see what you've got left. They rode beyond the ridge where the wind was sharp and the grass short. Luke hadn't ridden this far since before everything fell apart. From that high ground, the world looked endless. Blue sky above, green valley below, the faint thread of river winding through it all. For a moment, Luke just sat there, letting the quiet sink into him. The wind moved through Ashen's mane, the sound like an old song. He thought of the past, the fire, the loss, the long road of anger that had led him here. All of it had burned away, leaving something he hadn't expected: stillness. He reached down and patted Ashen's neck. We made it, didn't we? The horse snorted, almost as if answering. Luke laughed quietly. I'll take that as a yes. As they turned back toward the ranch, Luke saw movement near the edge of the property. 2 riders approaching from the east. He felt his pulse quicken for the briefest moment, then settle when he saw their posture. Not soldiers, not hired guns. Neighbors. When they reached him, one of them, a gray-haired woman from the next valley, tipped her hat. Heard you took care of Delroy, she said simply. Whole town owes you for that. Luke shook his head. Don't owe me a thing. Just keep your fences mended and your stock fed. That's payment enough. She smiled faintly. That's the kind of talk we've been missing round here. They spoke for a while, about the weather, the river, and the cattle that had gone wild since Delroy's men scattered. Simple things, honest things. When they rode off, Luke realized it was the first real conversation he'd had that didn't taste like grief. By evening, he and Ashen were back at the ranch. The sun burned low, turning the fields to copper. Luke sat on the porch with a tin cup of coffee, the steam curling into the cooling air. Ashen grazed nearby, tail flicking lazily. For a long while, Luke said nothing. He just watched the sky change colors, the deep orange melting into violet, then into the dark velvet of night. And then he heard it, soft, steady. The sound of hooves, many of them, echoing faintly through the valley. Not fast or threatening, just moving, alive. Luke stood, heart catching. Out across the far pasture, a small herd was wandering near the fence line. Cattle from Delroy's old spread, lost after the storm, now finding their way home. He smiled, the first real smile in years. Guess the land remembers after all. He walked down to meet them, the grass whispering around his boots. The herd watched him warily at first, then eased closer. One calf nuzzled his hand, curious and unafraid. Luke looked back at the house, the barn, and the sky spilling stars overhead. Looks like we've got company again, Ashen, he said softly. The horse lifted his head and gave a low, answering nicker. Luke chuckled. Yeah, I know. We'll take care of 'em. The night deepened, quiet and full. The echo of hooves faded, replaced by the steady hum of crickets and the soft rustle of wind through grass. And in that sound, simple, honest, alive, Luke finally heard what peace really was. It was not silence. It was not the absence of struggle. It was the rhythm of life still moving, even after everything else had stopped. The next morning broke clear and cool. Mist drifted along the valley floor, hanging low over the grass like smoke that had forgotten its purpose. Luke stepped out onto the porch, coffee tin in hand, and watched the first light spill across Ridge Creek. The land was different now, greener, gentler somehow, as if the earth itself had decided to forgive. Ashen stood near the fence, his coat shining pale in the morning light. The scar on his leg had darkened to a smooth line, the kind of mark that told more truth than any story could. Luke walked over, patted his neck, and smiled. "You're healing better than me," he said. Ashen flicked an ear, chewing slow on the tall grass. Luke leaned against the fence rail and took a long breath. For months he'd lived waiting for the next fight, for the next man to test his will, or the next storm to break it. But now there was just the wind, the sound of cattle in the distance, and the steady heartbeat of the world returning to itself. He thought of Delroy, of Silas, of all the men who had died trying to own what could never be owned. The land didn't belong to anyone. It only borrowed people for a while. A wagon rolled up the ridge by mid-morning. 2 men sat on the bench, the younger one waving as they approached. It was the deputy again, with the blacksmith from town beside him. "Merritt," the deputy called, "we brought you something." Luke met them halfway. "If it's trouble, leave it at the gate." The deputy grinned. "Not this time. Thought you could use a hand with that barn of yours." In the wagon bed lay timber, fresh, cut clean, stacked neat. Luke looked from the boards to the men. "You didn't have to do that." The blacksmith shrugged. "Didn't have to, sure. But you made it so we could. That counts for something." Luke felt a lump rise in his throat. "I don't got much to pay you with." The deputy smiled. "You already did." They unloaded the timber together, the sound of boots on dirt, the clatter of wood, the easy rhythm of work shared. Luke hadn't realized how much he missed that sound, the kind made by people who still believed in building things. By noon, the frame of the new barn stood in the sunlight, rough but strong. The men stepped back to look it over. "She'll hold," the blacksmith said, wiping his brow. Luke nodded. "She'll do." When they rode off, Luke stood a while longer, hands resting on the hammer at his belt. The wind carried the sound of hooves away until only quiet remained again, his kind of quiet. Later, as the sun slid low, Luke saddled Ashen and rode out past the ridge one last time. The light was gold and wide, painting every hill in the kind of color you only see when the day is almost done. From up there, he could see the river cutting through the valley, the fields that would soon bloom again, and the small grave under the mesquite tree where Silas lay. Luke dismounted, walked over, and stood with his hat pressed against his chest. "We did all right, old friend," he said softly. "Didn't fix everything, but maybe we fixed enough." The breeze answered, stirring the grass. He stayed until the sun touched the horizon, then turned to go. But before he left, he took the brand he'd carried since boyhood, the old Merritt M burned into a strip of leather, and set it against the stone. "No one owns Ridge Creek anymore," he said. "It belongs to whoever keeps it honest." Ashen nickered behind him, impatient for the ride home. Luke smiled and swung into the saddle. As they rode, a small herd appeared in the distance, wild horses, ghost gray and unclaimed, moving along the far side of the valley. They lifted their heads as Luke passed, eyes catching the last light of day. Ashen slowed, ears pricked forward. Luke looked their way and whispered, "Go on then. You're free." The herd moved like a wave, galloping into the open, manes flashing silver under the setting sun. Ashen watched until they vanished, his muscles twitching as if remembering the same wildness. Luke patted his neck. "We had our run too, didn't we?" The trail home was bathed in amber light. Every fence post, every blade of grass glowed as if lit from within. It felt less like an ending and more like the world taking one long, deep breath. By the time they reached the ranch, the stars were out, bright, clear, and close enough to touch. Luke unsaddled Ashen, brushed him down, and turned him loose into the pasture. The horse stood there a moment, looking at him before trotting off into the dark. Luke watched until he was gone, swallowed by starlight. Then he walked up to the porch, sat on the old step, and looked out across Ridge Creek. The night was full of life again. Crickets, wind, the faint sound of hooves echoing far away. He smiled, slow and quiet. "You hear that?" he said softly, as if to someone unseen. "That's the sound of something worth keeping." And for the first time in all his years, Luke Merritt didn't feel like a man running from ghosts. He felt like part of the land again, scarred, weathered, but alive. The lamp inside flickered once, then steadied. The wind moved through the grass, carrying the scent of cedar and rain, and somewhere in that sound, faint but certain, came the echo of a horse's breath. Luke tipped his hat to the stars. "Rest easy, boy," he said. "We're home." The night answered in silence, the kind that doesn't end things but holds them, whole and forgiven, under the wide western sky. And maybe that's where every story like this belongs, somewhere between what's lost and what's found again. If this one reached you, if it made you feel something, just drop a 0 or 1 in the comments below. That's all it takes to let me know you're out there, still riding with me through these western nights. Don't forget to subscribe, because out here, every sunset has another story waiting on the horizon. I'll see you in the next one, partner.